The woman standing on the porch of the weathered ranch house had dirt under her fingernails and fire in her eyes. And Yates Harmon knew from the first moment he saw her that she was going to change everything about his carefully ordered life. It was the spring of 1884, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the valley outside Malad City, Idaho, painting the scrubland in shades of gold and amber. He had ridden out to the neighboring ranch on behalf of the Cattlemen's Association, expecting to find some grieving widow ready to sell. But Olivia Easton stood there with her late husband's rifle propped against the doorframe, and a look that said she would sooner die than surrender an inch of her land. "You can tell Marcus Bentley and the rest of those vultures that I am not selling," she said, before Yates even dismounted. Her voice carried across the yard, clear and strong despite the exhaustion he could see etched into the lines around her eyes. She could not have been more than 26, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and a calico dress that had seen better days. "This ranch belonged to my husband, and now it belongs to me. I intend to keep it that way." Yates held up his hands in a gesture of peace, his weathered cowboy hat shading his face from the climbing sun. At 28, he had spent the better part of a decade working cattle drives from Montana to Nevada, and he prided himself on being able to read people as well as he read the land. What he read in Olivia Easton's stance told him that the other ranchers in the valley had severely underestimated this woman. "Madam, I am just delivering a message," he said, keeping his voice level and respectful. "But if you do not mind me saying, running a cattle ranch on your own is not exactly an easy proposition. Your husband's death was a tragedy, but pride is not going to put food on your table or keep rustlers from picking off your herd." "My pride has nothing to do with it," Olivia said, and he saw her jaw tighten. "This land is all I have left. Thomas and I built this ranch from nothing, and I will not let his brothers or Marcus Bentley or anyone else take it from me just because I am a woman. Now, if you have delivered your message, you can ride back to town and tell them my answer is no." Yates should have ridden away. He should have delivered her message to Bentley and the other ranchers and collected his payment for the errand. Instead, he found himself studying the ranch with a practiced eye, taking in the sagging fence posts, the barn that needed new shingles, the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance that looked too thin for this time of year. He saw a dozen problems that needed solving and only one stubborn woman to solve them. "How many head do you have?" he asked. Olivia's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I am trying to figure out if you have got a prayer of making it through the summer," Yates said bluntly. "I am not trying to run you off, madam, but facts are facts, and the fact is that you are going to need help if you want to keep this place running." "I have help," Olivia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have 2 ranch hands." "Had 2 ranch hands," a voice called from the barn, and an older man emerged, leading a saddled horse. He was gray-haired and weathered, with the bow-legged walk of someone who had spent his life on horseback. "Charlie lit out yesterday, Miss Olivia. Said he was not going to work for a woman rancher, no matter how much you paid him. It is just me now." Yates saw the way Olivia's shoulders stiffened, the brief flicker of fear that crossed her face before she forced it back down with sheer willpower. The older man met his eyes with a look that was equal parts challenge and resignation, and Yates understood in that moment that he was looking at the last loyal hand on a failing ranch. "Frank has been with us since the beginning," Olivia said quietly. "We will manage." "You will not," Yates said, and he saw her eyes flash with anger at his bluntness. "No offense to Frank here, but 2 people cannot run a ranch this size. You need at least 4 hands to have any hope of bringing in your cattle before winter, and that is not even accounting for the work that needs doing on your buildings and fences. Then I will hire more hands, Olivia said. With what money? Yates asked. Because I am guessing your husband's death left you in some debt, and the bank is not going to extend credit to a woman trying to run a cattle operation on her own. He saw the truth of his words hit home in the way Olivia's face went pale, and he almost regretted his harsh assessment. Almost. But he had learned long ago that false hope was crueler than hard truth, and if this woman was going to survive, she needed to understand exactly what she was up against. "Why do you care?" Olivia asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice now. "You rode out here on behalf of the men who want my land. Why are you telling me all this?" Yates took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly uncomfortable under her direct gaze. "Because I have seen what happens when the big ranchers drive out the small ones," he said finally. "And I am tired of watching it happen. You want to keep your ranch, Miss Easton. Then you are going to need someone who knows how to fight back against men like Marcus Bentley." "And I suppose you are volunteering for the job?" Olivia asked, and he heard the skepticism in her voice. "I am," Yates said, surprising himself as much as her. "I will work for room and board until you can afford to pay me proper wages. In return, I will help you get this ranch back on its feet and teach you everything you need to know about running a cattle operation." Olivia studied him for a long moment, and Yates found himself holding his breath, waiting for her answer. He could see the wheels turning behind her intelligent green eyes, weighing the risk of trusting a stranger against the certainty of failure if she tried to go it alone. "Why would you do that?" she asked finally. "What is in it for you? Honest work and a place to sleep," Yates said with a shrug. "And maybe the satisfaction of watching Marcus Bentley choke on his own greed." He saw the ghost of a smile touch Olivia's lips, and something in his chest tightened at the sight of it. "You do not like Marcus Bentley," she observed. "I do not like bullies," Yates corrected. "And I have known men like Bentley my whole life. They see something they want and they take it, and they do not much care who gets hurt in the process." Olivia was quiet for another moment, and then she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "You can stay. But I am warning you right now, I am not some helpless woman who needs a man to save her. If you are going to work here, we work together as equals. I make the decisions about my ranch." "Understood," Yates said, and he meant it. He had a feeling that trying to boss Olivia Easton around would be about as effective as trying to rope the wind. That night, Yates lay on his bedroll in the barn and stared up at the rafters, wondering what he had just gotten himself into. He had meant what he said about disliking bullies, but if he was being honest with himself, there was more to his decision than simple justice. There was something about Olivia Easton that had gotten under his skin from the moment he laid eyes on her. It was not just her beauty, though she was certainly handsome in a way that had nothing to do with fancy dresses or carefully arranged hair. It was the strength in her, the determination that blazed in her eyes like a flame that refused to be extinguished. She reminded him of the wild horses he had seen running free in the mountains, beautiful and fierce and untamable. The next morning, Yates woke before dawn and set to work assessing the ranch's most pressing needs. He walked the fence line and counted the broken posts, checked the water supply and found the creek running lower than it should be for spring, and inspected the small herd of cattle grazing in the near pasture. Frank found him there as the sun was climbing above the eastern mountains, and the older man's face was creased with worry. "She is in trouble, is she not?" Frank asked without preamble. "Yes," Yates said, seeing no point in sugarcoating the truth, "but it is not impossible. The land is good, and she has got enough cattle to rebuild if we can keep them alive and breeding. The real problem is going to be her neighbors. They want her gone," Frank said flatly. "Thomas barely held them off while he was alive." Now that he is dead, they figure it is only a matter of time before she gives up and sells. What happened to him? Yates asked. If you do not mind me asking. Frank's face darkened. Riding accident, supposedly. His horse threw him in the canyon, and by the time we found him, he had been dead for hours. But Thomas was the best horseman I ever knew. It did not make sense that his horse would spook like that. Yates felt a cold knot form in his stomach. You think it was not an accident? I think Thomas Easton made some powerful enemies when he refused to sell his water rights to Marcus Bentley, Frank said carefully. And I think it is mighty convenient that he died just before Bentley tried to buy up his land. They worked in silence after that, each man occupied with his own dark thoughts. Yates had no proof that Thomas Easton's death was anything but a tragic accident, but his instincts told him that Frank's suspicions were well-founded. If Bentley had been willing to kill to get what he wanted, then Olivia was in far more danger than she realized. Over the next few days, Yates threw himself into the work of rebuilding the ranch with a determination that surprised even him. He repaired fence posts, cleared brush from the irrigation ditches, and worked with Frank to round up the scattered cattle and check them for disease. It was hard, punishing labor that left him exhausted by the end of each day. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching the ranch slowly come back to life under their efforts. Olivia worked beside them every step of the way, and Yates found his respect for her growing with each passing day. She was not afraid to get her hands dirty or do the back-breaking work that most women of her station would have considered beneath them. She learned quickly, too, absorbing his lessons about cattle management and range rotation with an intelligence that impressed him. More than once, he caught himself watching her as she worked, admiring the way the sun caught the copper highlights in her hair or the graceful strength in the way she moved. It was on the 5th morning after his arrival that Yates established a routine that would become as regular as sunrise. He woke before dawn, made a pot of strong coffee, and carried a cup out to the porch where Olivia would be standing, watching the valley wake up. He never asked if she wanted the coffee, just handed it to her and stood beside her in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the land. You do not have to do this, Olivia said on that first morning, but she took the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. I know, Yates said simply. After that, she stopped protesting, and the morning ritual became something they both looked forward to. They would stand there on the porch in the soft light of dawn, drinking their coffee and discussing the work that needed doing that day. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, and sometimes they talked about other things. Yates told her about his years on the cattle drives, about seeing the great herds that stretched from horizon to horizon, and sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Olivia told him about growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, about marrying Thomas when she was barely 19, and following him west to Idaho with nothing but hope and determination. I know people think I am foolish for trying to keep this place, Olivia said one morning, staring out at the valley with an expression that was equal parts wistful and fierce. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am just being stubborn. There is nothing wrong with stubborn, Yates said. Stubborn is what built every ranch in this valley. Stubborn is what will keep you here. Is that what brought you here? Olivia asked, turning to look at him with those penetrating green eyes. Stubbornness, maybe, Yates admitted. Or maybe I just got tired of drifting from place to place with nothing to show for it but saddle sores and dust in my lungs. He did not tell her the rest of it, how seeing her standing on that porch with her rifle and her determination had stirred something in him that he thought had died years ago. He did not tell her that for the first time in his adult life, he was starting to think about putting down roots, about building something that would last. Those were dangerous thoughts for a cowboy who had spent his life moving from job to job, and he kept them to himself. But as the weeks passed, Yates found it increasingly difficult to deny what was growing between them. It was there in the way Olivia's face lit up when he came in from the fields, in the comfortable silence they shared during their morning coffee ritual, in the accidental touches that sent sparks racing up his spine. He tried to tell himself that he was just a hired hand helping a woman in need, but his heart knew better. The trouble started in earnest on a hot afternoon in early June when 3 riders appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at a steady trot. Yates was working on the barn roof when he spotted them, and something in the deliberate way they were riding made him climb down quickly and fetch his rifle from where it leaned against the barn wall. "We have got company," he called to Olivia, who was working in the vegetable garden beside the house. "And I do not think they are here for a social call." Olivia straightened, wiping the dirt from her hands on her apron, and her face went hard when she recognized the lead rider. "That is Marcus Bentley," she said quietly. "With 2 of his men." Yates positioned himself on the porch steps, rifle held loosely but ready, and watched as the 3 men rode into the yard. Marcus Bentley was a big man in his mid-40s, with a florid face and the kind of confidence that came from years of getting his own way. The 2 men flanking him were clearly hired guns, hard-eyed and dangerous-looking. "Miss Easton," Bentley said, tipping his hat in a mockery of courtesy. "I hope this fine day finds you well." "What do you want, Marcus?" Olivia asked, and Yates heard the steel in her voice. "I wanted to check on you, see how you are managing out here all on your own," Bentley said, his eyes sliding past her to take in the repairs that had been made to the ranch. "I heard you hired yourself a new hand. Did not take my advice about selling, I see." "My affairs are none of your concern," Olivia said coldly. "Now, that is where you are wrong," Bentley said, and all pretense of friendliness dropped from his voice. "You see, your husband made certain agreements before he died. Agreements about water rights and grazing land. I am here to see that those agreements are honored." "Thomas made no such agreements," Olivia said. "And even if he had, I am not bound by promises made without my knowledge or consent." Bentley's face darkened with anger. "You are making a mistake, Miss Easton. A woman alone in this country needs friends, and you are doing your best to turn everyone against you." "Seems to me she has got at least one friend," Yates said quietly, and he saw Bentley's eyes snap to him, assessing the threat he represented. "And who might you be?" Bentley asked. "Someone who does not like seeing a woman bullied," Yates said. "Now the lady has asked you to state your business. Either do so, or ride out." For a moment, Yates thought Bentley might do something stupid. He could see the calculation in the bigger man's eyes, weighing the odds of a fight against the cost of backing down. Finally, Bentley smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "This is not over," he said to Olivia. "You cannot hold out forever, and when you finally come to your senses, you will find my offer considerably less generous than it is today." He wheeled his horse around and rode out without another word, his 2 men following close behind. Yates watched them go, keeping his rifle ready until they were out of sight. "That man killed my husband," Olivia said quietly, and when Yates turned to look at her, he saw tears streaming down her face. "I cannot prove it, but I know it as surely as I know my own name. And now he is going to try to kill me too." Yates set his rifle down and went to her, and before he could think better of it, he pulled her into his arms. She stiffened for a moment, and then she collapsed against his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, and felt something crack open inside his chest at the vulnerability she was showing him. "I will not let that happen," he said fiercely. I swear to you, Olivia, I will not let him hurt you." She pulled back, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand, and looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and something else he could not quite name. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing all this for me? You barely know me." Yates opened his mouth to give some easy answer, some casual deflection, but the words that came out surprised them both. "Because from the moment I saw you standing on that porch, I knew you were worth fighting for," he said. "Because you are brave and strong, and you deserve better than what these men are trying to do to you. And because somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of this as just a job and started thinking of it as home." Olivia stared at him, her green eyes wide with shock, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a tenderness that made his breath catch. "I am glad you stayed," she whispered. Yates knew he should step back, should put some distance between them before he did something they might both regret. But he could not make himself move, could not break the spell that held them both frozen in that moment. Instead, he lowered his head and kissed her, gently at first and then with growing passion as she kissed him back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers and tried to collect his scattered thoughts. "I should not have done that," he said. "Why not?" Olivia asked. "Because you are vulnerable right now, and I am supposed to be helping you, not taking advantage of you," Yates said. Olivia pulled back, and there was fire in her eyes again. "I am not some delicate flower that needs protecting from my own feelings, Yates Harmon," she said sharply. "I know my own mind, and I know what I want. The question is, do you?" Yates looked at her, at this fierce, beautiful woman who had somehow worked her way into his heart, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes," he said simply. "God help me, but yes." That night, they sat together on the porch long after the sun had set, talking about everything and nothing while the stars wheeled overhead. Yates told her things he had never told anyone, about growing up in a one-room shack in Missouri with a father who drank and a mother who died too young. Olivia told him about the loneliness of her marriage, how she had loved Thomas but never quite felt like she was enough for him, how his death had been devastating and liberating in equal measure. "Does that make me a terrible person?" she asked quietly. "To feel relieved that he is gone?" "It makes you human," Yates said. "Love is not always simple, and grief is complicated. There is no shame in feeling what you feel." As the weeks turned into months, Yates found himself settling into a rhythm of life on the ranch that felt more natural than anything he had ever known. He rose each morning before dawn and carried coffee to Olivia on the porch, and they would stand together watching the sun rise over the valley. They worked side by side during the day, repairing fences and tending cattle, and slowly bringing the ranch back to prosperity. And at night, they sat together on the porch and talked about their dreams for the future. The other ranchers in the valley watched their progress with growing resentment. Word had spread that Olivia Easton had refused to sell, that she had hired help and was making a go of it on her own, and the men who had expected her to fail were not pleased. Yates heard the whispers when he rode into Malad City for supplies, saw the hostile looks from the cowboys who worked for Bentley and the other big ranchers. He knew trouble was coming, but he was determined to be ready for it. The first act of sabotage came in late July when someone cut the fence along the northern pasture, allowing half the herd to wander onto Bentley's land. Yates discovered the damage during his morning rounds and immediately rode to fetch Frank and Olivia. "They will claim our cattle strayed and demand payment for the grass they ate," Olivia said, her face pale with anger as she surveyed the cut fence. "Or worse, they will say we were trying to steal grazing rights. Then we will get them back before anyone notices," Yates said grimly. "Frank, you stay here and repair this fence. Olivia and I will round up the cattle." They rode hard across the valley, tracking the scattered herd by the fresh signs in the dirt. Most of the cattle had not wandered far, and they managed to drive them back through the gap in the fence before Bentley's men spotted them. But it was a close thing, and Yates knew they had gotten lucky. "This is just the beginning," he told Olivia as they rode back toward the ranch house. "They are testing us, seeing how we will respond. It is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know," Olivia said quietly, "but I am not leaving. This is my home, and I will fight for it." "I know you will," Yates said, and he reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And I will be right there beside you." The sabotage continued through August and into September. Someone poisoned the well, forcing them to haul water from the creek for 2 weeks while Yates dug a new one. The barn caught fire one night, and only quick action from Frank saved most of the hay and equipment. Fences were cut, cattle went missing, and more than once Yates found signs that someone had been watching the ranch house from the hills. Through it all, Yates stood on Olivia's porch every morning with coffee and quiet strength, and his presence became the thing she relied on most. They had not shared another kiss since that first afternoon, both of them held back by some combination of propriety and fear of ruining what they had built. But the love growing between them was undeniable, visible in every glance and touch and shared moment of silence. It was Frank who finally said something about it, cornering Yates in the barn one evening with a knowing look on his weathered face. "You planning on making an honest woman of Miss Olivia?" he asked bluntly. Yates felt heat rise in his face. "I do not know what you are talking about." "The hell you do not," Frank said with a snort. "I've got eyes in my head, boy. The two of you are dancing around each other like nervous colts. Now, I loved Thomas Easton like a son, but he has been dead 6 months now, and Olivia deserves to be happy. So does that mean you are going to do right by her, or are you just playing at being a rancher?" "It is not that simple," Yates protested. "I am just a drifter with nothing to my name. What do I have to offer her?" "Yourself," Frank said simply. "And from where I am standing, that seems to be exactly what she wants." That night, Yates lay awake in his bunk and wrestled with the truth of Frank's words. He had spent his whole adult life avoiding attachments, convincing himself that a cowboy's life was better lived alone and unfettered. But Olivia had changed everything. She had shown him what it meant to have something worth fighting for, worth building a life around. The question was whether he had the courage to reach for it. The answer came the next morning when he carried coffee out to the porch and found Olivia standing there with tears on her face and a letter clutched in her hand. "What happened?" Yates asked, setting the coffee cups down and taking her by the shoulders. "The bank," Olivia said, her voice breaking. "They are calling in Thomas's loans. I have 30 days to pay off the debt or they will foreclose on the ranch." Yates felt as if someone had punched him in the gut. "How much do you owe?" $2,000, Olivia whispered. "I do not have anywhere near that much. Even if I sold every head of cattle, I could not raise enough in time." Yates pulled her into his arms, his mind racing through possibilities and finding nothing but dead ends. $2,000 might as well have been $2 million for all the chance they had of raising it in 30 days. "Bentley is behind this," Olivia said, her voice muffled against his chest. "He owns half the bank's board. This is his way of forcing me out." "Then we will find another way," Yates said fiercely. "We are not giving up, Olivia. Not now, not ever." But even as he said the words, he felt the weight of their impossible situation settling over him. They had fought so hard, worked so many hours to build the ranch back up, and now it was all going to be taken away by the stroke of a pen. That afternoon, Yates rode into Malad City with a desperate plan forming in his mind. He went first to the bank, trying to negotiate an extension on the loan, but the bank manager refused to even discuss it. He went next to the land office, looking for any legal loophole that might help, but found nothing. Finally, driven by desperation, he went to the one place he had sworn never to return, the saloon where high-stakes poker games ran every night. Yates had been a skilled card player in his younger days, good enough to win far more often than he lost. But he had also seen what gambling could do to a man, had watched it destroy his father and too many other good men. He had given it up years ago, swearing never to touch cards again. But now, with Olivia's ranch on the line, he was willing to break that promise. He bought into the game with the last of his savings, and played with a focused intensity that came from knowing he could not afford to lose. The cards were kind to him that first night, and he walked away with nearly $300 in winnings. He came back the next night and won again, doubling his stake. Word spread quickly about the cowboy who was on a hot streak, and the games grew bigger, the pots larger. Olivia knew something was wrong when Yates stopped showing up for their morning coffee ritual. She found him on the third morning, stumbling back to the ranch just after dawn with exhaustion written on every line of his face and a roll of bills in his pocket. "What are you doing?" she demanded, grabbing his arm as he tried to walk past her. "Where have you been?" "Making money," Yates said simply. "I am up to $800. If my luck holds, I can have the full amount in another week." "By gambling?" Olivia asked, and he heard the horror in her voice. "Yates, you cannot risk everything on cards. What if you lose?" "I will not lose," Yates said with more confidence than he felt. "I am a good player, Olivia. I can do this." "No," Olivia said firmly. "I will not let you destroy yourself trying to save my ranch. If we lose this place, we lose it together. But I will not watch you gamble away your soul." "What else am I supposed to do?" Yates asked, and he heard the frustration and fear in his own voice. "Stand by and watch them take everything from you." "I cannot do that, Olivia. I will not." "Then we will find another way," Olivia said. "Together, but not like this." They argued for the better part of an hour, neither willing to back down until finally Frank intervened. "There might be another option," the older man said quietly. "Something I should have mentioned weeks ago, but I was not sure if it was my place." "What are you talking about?" Olivia asked. "Your husband had a life insurance policy," Frank said. "He took it out about a year before he died. Said he wanted to make sure you would be taken care of if something happened to him. I was the witness on the paperwork, but Thomas never told you about it because he did not want you worrying." Olivia stared at him in shock. "How much?" $3,000, Frank said. "More than enough to pay off the bank and have some left over to keep the ranch running through winter." "Why did you not tell me this before?" Olivia demanded. "Because the insurance company has been investigating," Frank admitted. "They heard the rumors about Thomas's death not being an accident, and they have been stalling on paying out. But if you file a formal claim and push them, they will have to pay eventually." Hope surged in Yates's chest, but it was tempered by the reality of their timeline. "We have 30 days, he said. "Insurance companies can take months to pay out, especially if they are looking for a reason to deny the claim." "Then I will go to Boy's and demand payment in person," Olivia said, her jaw set with determination. "I will camp on their doorstep if I have to, but I am not letting Marcus Bentley steal my ranch." "I am coming with you," Yates said immediately. "Someone needs to stay here and watch the place," Olivia pointed out. "If we both leave, Bentley's men will burn it to the ground." She was right, and Yates hated it. The thought of letting her ride to Boy's alone, of being separated from her even for a few days, made his chest ache. But Frank volunteered to go with her, and in the end, Yates had to accept that the ranch needed defending. He stood on the porch the next morning and watched them ride away, Olivia astride her chestnut mare and Frank on his steady gelding, and he felt as if a part of himself was leaving with them. She had turned back once at the edge of the property, raising her hand in farewell, and he had lifted his own in response, memorizing the way the morning light caught in her hair. The days while she was gone were the longest of Yates's life. He threw himself into work during the daylight hours, riding the fence line constantly to watch for intruders and maintaining a visible presence on the property. At night, he sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees and tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong in boys. It was on the fourth night that Bentley's men came. Yates heard them before he saw them, the sound of hoofbeats in the darkness alerting him to the approaching riders. There were at least 6 of them, maybe more, and they were not bothering with stealth. They rode straight up to the ranch house, torches blazing in the darkness, and formed a rough semicircle in the yard. "Harmon," Bentley's voice called out, "we know Miss Easton is gone. There is just you here and you are outnumbered. Ride away now and we will let you go. Stay, and we will burn this place to the ground with you in it." Yates stepped out onto the porch, rifle ready, and felt a strange calm settle over him. He had known this moment was coming, had prepared himself for it. "I am not going anywhere," he called back, "and neither is this ranch. You want it, you will have to go through me." "So be it," Bentley said, and Yates saw him signal to his men. What happened next unfolded in a confusion of gunfire and chaos that Yates would remember in fragments for the rest of his life. He fired first, aiming not to kill but to scatter, sending bullets into the dirt near the horses' hooves. The animals reared and screamed, throwing off their riders' aim, and Yates used the confusion to dive off the porch and take cover behind the water trough. Bullets splintered the porch railing where he had been standing, and one of Bentley's men threw his torch at the barn, trying to start the fire they had threatened. But Yates had anticipated that move, had soaked the barn walls with water before the sun went down, and the torch fizzled and died in the damp wood. The fight lasted perhaps 10 minutes, though it felt like hours to Yates. He moved from cover to cover, firing carefully and conserving his ammunition, trying to protect as much of the ranch as he could while staying alive. He took a bullet in the shoulder that spun him around and sent white-hot pain shooting through his body, but adrenaline kept him moving, kept him fighting. And then, just when he thought the situation was hopeless, he heard the sound of more riders approaching from the west. For a terrible moment he thought it was reinforcements for Bentley, but then he recognized the voices shouting in the darkness. "This is Marshal Webb. Drop your weapons." Bentley's men scattered like startled crows, abandoning their attack and fleeing into the darkness. Bentley himself sat frozen on his horse, his face pale in the torchlight, as the marshal and his deputies surrounded him. "You made a mistake coming here tonight, Bentley," Marshal Webb said coldly. "I've got witnesses who saw you ride out with your men, and I've got one very convincing testimony from a woman who just filed a formal complaint in Boys about your harassment and intimidation tactics." Yates leaned against the water trough, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest, and watched as the marshal placed Bentley under arrest. It was not until after the deputies had hauled the big rancher away that he saw Olivia riding into the yard, her face white with fear. "Yates!" she cried, throwing herself off her horse and running to him. "Oh God, you are bleeding." "I am all right," Yates said, though the words came out slurred with pain and shock. "Did you get the money?" "Yes," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands against his wounded shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. "The insurance company paid out once I showed them the evidence, Frank, and I collected about Thomas's death. We have enough to save the ranch and then some. But none of that matters if you are dying." "I am not dying," Yates said, and he managed a weak smile. "Takes more than one bullet to kill a stubborn cowboy." The doctor was summoned from town, and he dug the bullet out of Yates's shoulder by lamplight on the kitchen table. Olivia held his hand through the whole agonizing procedure, her grip tight enough to leave bruises, and Yates focused on her face to distract himself from the pain. "You are an idiot," she said fiercely, once the doctor had finished and left them alone. "You could have been killed." "I could not let them take your ranch," Yates said simply. "It is just land," Olivia said, and her voice broke. "Just dirt and grass and cattle. It is not worth your life, Yates. You are worth more than that. You are worth more than all of it." "Not to me," Yates said. "You made this place matter, Olivia. You made everything matter." She leaned down and kissed him then, gently because of his injury but with a depth of feeling that left no room for doubt. When she pulled back, her green eyes were shining with tears and something else that made his heart race despite his weakened state. "I love you," she said simply. "I think I have loved you since that first morning you brought me coffee. And I nearly lost you tonight, and I cannot bear the thought of it." "You did not lose me," Yates said, reaching up with his good hand to cup her face. "I am right here, and I am not going anywhere. I love you too, Olivia. I think I have since the moment I saw you standing on that porch with fire in your eyes." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Malad City, with Frank standing as witness and half the town in attendance. News of Bentley's arrest and the evidence of his crimes had spread quickly, and public opinion had turned sharply in Olivia's favor. The other ranchers who had been harassing her suddenly found themselves under scrutiny, and most decided it was better to leave her alone than face legal consequences of their own. Yates recovered from his wound slowly, spending his convalescence sitting on the porch while Olivia brought him coffee each morning in a reversal of their old routine. They talked about their plans for the ranch, about expanding the herd and building a proper house to replace the aging ranch building. They talked about the future they would build together, about children and stability, and all the things Yates had never dared to dream about. By the time winter arrived, painting the valley in shades of white and silver, Yates was back on his feet and working alongside his wife to prepare the ranch for the cold months ahead. They had hired 2 new hands to help with the work, and Frank had announced his intention to stay on as foreman for as long as they would have him. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following months. Spring came again, bringing new calves and green grass and the promise of prosperity. The ranch thrived under their joint management, with Olivia's sharp mind for business complementing Yates's practical ranching skills. They worked as true partners, making decisions together and building something that belonged to both of them equally. Their first child was born in the spring of 1886, a squalling red-faced boy they named Matthew after Yates's father. Yates held his son for the first time with hands that shook from emotion, marveling at the tiny perfect fingers and the way the baby's eyes scrunched up when he cried. Olivia watched them both with a soft smile, exhausted but radiantly happy. "Are you happy?" she asked him later when the baby was sleeping and they lay together in the darkness. "More than I ever thought possible," Yates said honestly. "I spent so many years drifting, never putting down roots because I was afraid of being trapped. But this is not a trap, Olivia. This is freedom. This is home." The years that followed brought both joy and challenge. They had a second child, a daughter named Sarah, 2 years after Matthew. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the valley. They weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle disease and fluctuating markets, but they weathered them together, and that made all the difference. Marcus Bentley was convicted of conspiracy in Thomas Easton's death and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. The evidence that Olivia and Frank had collected proved damning, and several of Bentley's former associates testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences. His ranch was broken up and sold off, with Yates and Olivia purchasing several parcels that adjoined their own land. Frank lived to see Matthew's 10th birthday, before passing peacefully in his sleep, one warm summer night. They buried him on a hill overlooking the valley, with a simple stone that read, "Frank Morrison, loyal friend and true cowboy." Olivia cried for days after his death, mourning the man who had been like a father to her, and Yates held her through her grief the way she had held him through his own struggles. The morning ritual of coffee on the porch never changed, though. Every day, without fail, Yates woke before dawn and carried 2 cups out to where Olivia stood watching the sun rise. Sometimes the children joined them, Matthew and Sarah chattering excitedly about their plans for the day. But often it was just the 2 of them, standing in companionable silence and watching the light spread across the land they had fought so hard to keep. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked one morning when they were both well into their 40s, the children grown and working the ranch alongside them. "Giving up your wandering ways to settle down here?" Yates turned to look at her, at the silver threads in her auburn hair and the laugh lines around her eyes, at the woman who had changed his entire world with her courage and determination. "Not for a single moment," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Every good thing in my life started the day I rode up to this porch and saw you standing here. You were worth fighting for then, and you are worth fighting for now. You always will be." Olivia leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, holding her close as they watched the sun climb higher into the sky. The valley spread out before them, golden and peaceful, marked with the evidence of their hard work and dedication. Fences they had repaired together, fields they had cultivated, cattle bearing the brand they had designed as partners. In the distance, they could see Matthew working with the hands to move a section of the herd to fresh pasture, his skills as a horseman already surpassing his father's. Sarah was in the barn, tending to a mare that was due to foal any day, displaying the same gentle competence with animals that Olivia had shown from the beginning. "We built something good here," Olivia said softly. "Something that will last." "We did," Yates agreed. "Together." The ranch continued to thrive into the new century, weathering the changes that came with modernization and progress. They installed a proper water system, built a larger house with running water and electricity, and watched as the rough frontier territory of Idaho became a proper state. The town of Malad City grew and prospered, and the Harmon Ranch became known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. Matthew married a schoolteacher from town when he was 23, and they gave Yates and Olivia their first grandchildren, twin girls with Olivia's green eyes and Yates's dark hair. Sarah married a young rancher from a neighboring valley, and they established their own spread with help and advice from her parents. The family grew and expanded, roots reaching deep into the Idaho soil. Through all the years and changes, one thing remained constant. Every morning, Yates stood on the porch with Olivia and drank coffee as the sun rose. His hair turned silver and his body grew stiff with age, but his love for the woman beside him only deepened with time. She was still fierce, still determined, still the same woman who had refused to be driven from her land all those years ago. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Yates commissioned a local artist to paint a portrait of the ranch as seen from the porch where they had shared so many mornings together. He hung it in the living room where Olivia would see it every day, a reminder of everything they had built and preserved. "You are a sentimental old fool," Olivia said when she saw it, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I am your sentimental old fool," Yates corrected, pulling her into his arms, "and I would not have it any other way." They celebrated their anniversary with a party that filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard. 3 generations of family gathered to honor the couple who had started it all. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Stories told and retold about the early days when a stubborn woman rancher and a drifting cowboy had refused to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. As the sun set and the party wound down, Yates and Olivia slipped away to their porch, seeking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. They stood together in the fading light, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest, and watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. 30 years, Olivia murmured. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime." "It has been a good lifetime," Yates said, "the best I could have imagined." "Do you remember that first morning," Olivia asked, "when you showed up on behalf of the Cattlemen's Association and I was so determined to hate you?" "I remember," Yates said with a soft laugh. "I also remember thinking you were the most beautiful and terrifying woman I had ever seen." "Terrifying," Olivia said, pulling back to look at him with mock indignation. "Absolutely terrifying," Yates confirmed. "You still are sometimes, but that is one of the things I love most about you. You have never let anyone make you less than you are." "You made me more," Olivia said seriously. "You saw something in me worth fighting for when everyone else just saw a woman who could not possibly manage on her own. You gave me the courage to believe in myself." "You already had that courage," Yates said. "I just gave you a hand holding on to it." They stayed on the porch long after the last guest had left, talking and reminiscing until the moon was high in the sky. It was a conversation they had shared countless times over the years, but it never grew old. Each retelling added new layers of meaning, new appreciation for how far they had come and how much they had overcome together. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all lives do. They lost friends and gained new ones, weathered economic downturns and celebrated good harvests. The ranch passed through different phases, adapting to changing markets and new technologies, but always remaining true to the foundation that Yates and Olivia had built together. When Yates was 72 and Olivia 70, they officially retired from active management of the ranch, turning over day-to-day operations to Matthew while retaining ownership and advisory roles. It was a difficult transition for both of them, especially Olivia, who had poured so much of herself into keeping the ranch running during those early desperate years. "I feel useless," she confessed to Yates one morning as they sat on the porch watching Matthew direct the hands in their work. "Like I have been put out to pasture along with the old cattle." "You are not useless," Yates said firmly. "You are teaching the next generation everything you know. That is not retirement, that is legacy." His words helped, and Olivia gradually adjusted to her new role as advisor and grandmother, rather than active rancher. She spent her days tending an expansive vegetable garden, teaching her grandchildren to ride, and recording the history of the ranch in a series of journals that would be preserved for future generations. Yates, for his part, found unexpected pleasure in the slower pace of life. He still rose before dawn and carried coffee to the porch where Olivia waited. But now, they had hours to spend together without the pressing demands of ranch work pulling them apart. They took long walks around the property, visiting favorite spots and reminiscing about the memories attached to each location. They traveled for the first time in their lives, taking a train to San Francisco and marveling at how much the world had changed since they were young. But they always came back to the ranch, to the porch where their love story had begun, and where it continued to unfold with each passing day. That simple ritual of morning coffee and quiet conversation remained the cornerstone of their relationship, a daily renewal of the vows they had made so many years before. On a crisp autumn morning when Yates was 78, he carried coffee to the porch as he had done thousands of times before and found Olivia standing there with tears on her face. For a moment his heart seized with panic, thinking something terrible had happened, but then she turned to him with a smile that took his breath away. "I was just thinking," she said softly, "about how lucky I am, how lucky we have been." Yates set down the coffee cups and gathered her into his arms, holding her close and feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. "I am the lucky one," he said. "I was just a drifter with no prospects, and you gave me a reason to stay." "We gave each other reasons to stay," Olivia corrected. "That is what love is, I think, finding someone who makes staying more appealing than leaving." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, the ranch house once again filled with music and laughter. The mayor of Malad City gave a speech honoring their contributions to the community, and the local newspaper ran a feature story about the woman rancher who had refused to be driven out and the cowboy who had stood by her side. But the moment Yates treasured most came at the end of the evening, when he and Olivia once again found themselves alone on their porch. She took his weathered hand in hers and looked up at him with eyes that still held the same fire he had fallen in love with all those years ago. 50 years, she said wonderingly, and I would do it all again. Every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt, I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "So would I," Yates said, and he bent to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that held 50 years of love and commitment and partnership. They stood together on the porch as the stars emerged overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch spread out around them in the darkness, a testament to their courage and stubbornness and unwavering faith in each other. The morning ritual continued for several more years, though both of them moved more slowly now, their bodies bearing the accumulated weight of decades of hard work and long life. Yates's hands shook slightly as he poured the coffee, and Olivia needed his arm to steady herself on the porch steps. But they still rose before dawn, still carried their coffee to the porch, still watched the sun rise together as they had done since the beginning. Yates lived to be 82 years old, dying peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night with Olivia holding his hand. His last words were to tell her he loved her, and his last sight was her face, still beautiful to him after more than half a century together. Olivia lived for 3 more years after his death, maintaining the morning coffee ritual even in his absence. She would stand on the porch with 2 cups, one for herself and one left untouched in his memory, and talk to him as if he were still there beside her. The family worried about her, but she seemed content in her grief, secure in the knowledge that they would be reunited soon enough. When she died at 85, it was in the early morning, and they found her on the porch with an empty coffee cup in her hand and a peaceful expression on her face. The sun was just rising over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, and those who found her said it looked as if she was simply watching the dawn, waiting for someone to join her. They buried Olivia next to Yates on the hill overlooking the ranch, with a shared headstone that read, "Yates and Olivia Harmon, partners in life and love." The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, And the story of the woman rancher who refused to leave and the cowboy who stood on her porch every morning became the foundation myth of the family legacy. The porch where they had shared so many mornings was carefully preserved as the ranch house was expanded and modernized around it. Even 100 years later, descendants of Yates and Olivia would stand there with their morning coffee and think about the courage it had taken to build something lasting in a hostile land, about the power of love to overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. The story of their love became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that the best things in life are worth fighting for, and that partnership and determination can overcome any challenge. Young couples starting their own ranches would seek out the old porch, hoping that standing where Yates and Olivia had stood would bring them the same fortune and enduring love. And on quiet mornings when the light was just right, people swore they could see two figures standing on that porch, cups of coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the valley they had loved so much. Whether it was memory or ghost or simply the power of a story well told, no one could say. But the image persisted, a testament to a love that had defied the odds and built something that would last for generations. The ranch that Olivia had fought so hard to keep, and that Yates had helped her save, became one of the most successful operations in Idaho, weathering economic depressions and world wars and all the changes that came with the 20th and 21st centuries. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been, a testament to two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to give up on their dreams or each other. Their story was told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but the core truth remained unchanged. A woman rancher had faced down powerful enemies who wanted her gone. A cowboy had stood on her porch every morning with coffee and quiet strength. And together, they had built something beautiful and lasting that would endure long after they were gone. It was a story of courage and stubbornness, of determination and partnership, but most of all it was a story of love, the kind of deep and abiding love that transforms not just two lives but all the lives that come after. And every morning, as the sun rose over the Idaho Valley, that love continued to shine as brightly as it had on that first morning when a drifting cowboy looked into a stubborn woman's eyes and decided that some things were worth staying for.